Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night because of a dream so vivid, so strange, that it didn't feel like just a dream? A familiar place you've never visited, a name you've never heard, a death you never actually died. Modern science tells us when we die, it's the end. But what if it's not? All around the world, there are children who, from a very young age, describe lives they never lived with eerie pinpoint accuracy. They name real people, real towns, even explain how they died, and the details check out. Today, World Mysteries invites you on a journey that defies time and space, into a realm where the past and present seem to merge. These are 10 true stories of people who remembered their past lives. Some will move you, some will chill you to the bone, but all of them will make you question, have we lived before? Don't forget to subscribe to World Mysteries and hit the bell icon so you won't miss any of our chilling explorations. And if you have ever felt like you've lived a life before this one, tell us your story in the comments below. Story 1. James Leininger, reincarnated from the battlefield. James Leininger was an ordinary little boy living in Louisiana, USA. But shortly after his second birthday, he began to exhibit strange behavior. Every night, he would wake up screaming, panic-stricken, as if being pursued by something invisible. He would shout things no toddler should ever know. "The plane's on fire. I can't get out. They shot me from below." His parents, Bruce and Andrea, initially thought it was just a phase, perhaps bad dreams, but the nightmares kept happening. And what terrified them the most was that James began to describe the crashing airplane with unusual precision. It was a plane with folding wings. It took off from a ship called the Natoma. I used to fly it. He even named a friend, Jack Larson, and he claimed he'd been shot down on a mission near Iwo Jima. Out of curiosity, Andrea looked up Natoma Bay on Google, and her blood ran cold. It was the name of a real escort aircraft carrier that had served in the Pacific during World War II. It had taken part in the Battle of Iwo Jima, exactly as James described. This wasn't coincidence. How could a toddler possibly know any of this? Soon, Bruce, James's skeptical and logical father, began his own investigation. He tracked down the list of servicemen who had been aboard the USS Natoma Bay. One name stood out like a ghost from the past: James M. Houston, Jr., a young fighter pilot who flew a Corsair, the exact model James had drawn repeatedly. Houston had been killed in action during a mission near Iwo Jima in 1945. He was only 21 years old. The deeper they dug, the more chilling the truth became. James not only recalled the ship's name, the plane, the location, and his friend, he knew intimate details that no one had ever photo of pilots. When shown a photo of pilots, James pointed directly at one and said, "That's me." It was James Houston. James also remembered his previous home, his sister's name, and even described personal belongings that matched Houston's life, items stored away and long forgotten. When the Leiningers were brought to meet Houston's surviving family, James was able to recall facts that shocked even them. He described cracks in the wall of Houston's childhood room, a stuffed toy by the bed, and even the dog's name. Many experts, including Dr. Jim Tucker from the University of Virginia, who specializes in reincarnation studies, examined the case. There was no sign that James or his family had accessed this information beforehand. The evidence was either an impossible coincidence or proof that James had somehow carried the memories of another life. As James grew older, those memories faded like a morning mist. Today, he lives as a normal young man. But his early childhood left a deep imprint, not only on his family, but on millions around the world who heard his story. Could it be that a restless soul found its way back through the body of a child? Could memories survive death and find passage through time? No one can say for certain, but if it's true, then maybe death is not a full stop. Maybe it's just a comma in a sentence that continues. Story 2. Shanti Devi, the girl who remembered being a wife and mother. But James wasn't the only one. If the memories of a past life could surface in a young boy from modern-day America, then one must ask, could such a phenomenon exist elsewhere in the world? The answer is yes. And nearly a century ago, in a quiet alleyway in New Delhi, India, a little girl named Shanti Devi stunned the nation and eventually the world when she declared, "These are not my parents. I have a husband and a son in Mathura." At just 4 years old, Shanti began speaking of another life entirely, another city, another family, and another name, Lugdi Devi. At first, no one took her seriously. Adults dismissed it as the wild imagination of a child. But Shanti wasn't merely fantasizing. She described with striking clarity a man named Kedar Nath, her husband in that previous life, and a house in the city of Mathura, hundreds of kilometers away. She recalled the clothes she wore, her favorite foods, and even how she died due to complications during childbirth. Her story spread rapidly, first among teachers, then to local officials, and soon across the country. The case became so prominent that the Indian government formed a formal investigative commission, an unprecedented step for any reincarnation claim. And Kedar Nath? He was real. When he was brought to meet Shanti, he posed as someone else to test her. But she recognized him instantly. She called him by name and even referenced intimate moments they had shared, things no one else could have known. The commission took her to Mathura, where things became even more astonishing. Shanti, still a child, led the way through the city's winding streets, pointing out landmarks, alleyways, and finally stopping in front of a house. This is my house, she said. This is where I lived, as Lugdi Devi. It was indeed the former home of Lugdi. Inside, Shanti recognized her family members, greeting each one by name, recalling relationships, small details, and hidden family stories, all verified to be accurate. The official government report concluded that no one in Shanti's current family had ever been to Mathura or had contact with Kedarnath's family. The level of detail in her memories was beyond what any ordinary child could fabricate. Shanti Devi became a national symbol of reincarnation. Scholars, journalists, and researchers visited her from around the world. Even Mahatma Gandhi took interest in her case, personally dispatching investigators. And they returned with the same conclusion: unexplainable, irrefutable. As she grew older, Shanti withdrew from the public eye, but the memories, those haunting fragments of another life, never truly left her. Her story remains one of the most compelling cases of reincarnation ever documented. It forces us to confront a chilling possibility. What if memory doesn't die with the body? What if we've lived before? You may believe it, you may not. But sometimes, the most unsettling thing is when a child speaks with the voice of someone who once lived and died long ago. Story 3. Cameron Macaulay, the boy who remembered a house on the Isle of Barra. Cameron Macaulay was born and raised in the city of Glasgow, Scotland. But from the moment he could speak, he insisted on something that left his family deeply unsettled. He didn't belong there. He would often sit quietly by the classroom window at preschool, gazing into the distance, whispering to himself, "I miss home, but not this home. My real home is in Barra." Barra, a remote island in the Hebrides off the west coast of Scotland. No one in Cameron's family had ever been there. They had no relatives, no friends, no connections to the place. And yet, Cameron spoke of it as though he had lived there all his life. Whenever he spoke of his old home, his eyes would grow distant and filled with longing. He described a white house by the sea where small airplanes flew overhead every day. He talked about a black dog running around the yard, a father named Shane Robertson with golden hair, and a death falling from something very high. These weren't the wild fantasies of a child. There was a depth to his stories, a sense of sadness, of nostalgia, as if he were mourning something he couldn't fully grasp. His parents began recording the details, and soon the mystery deepened. A documentary team took interest in the case. They arranged for Cameron and his mother to travel to the Isle of Barra to test the truth of his memories. No clues were given, no advanced scouting. The goal was simple: let the boy lead the way. And that's exactly what he did. As soon as they arrived, Cameron lit up. It was as if he had finally come home. He pulled his mother and the film crew through narrow lanes, across grassy fields, and stopped in front of a white house facing the ocean, just as he had always described. That house had once belonged to the Robertson family, the same name Cameron had mentioned. A man named Shane Robertson had lived there with his son, both of whom had passed away years earlier. But it didn't stop there. Inside the house, Cameron identified small details: a hidden cupboard behind the kitchen, an old swing that used to hang from a tree. And they were all real, weathered, forgotten by time, but exactly as he'd described them. There was no logical explanation. Cameron's family had never visited Barra before. They'd never spoken of it, never researched it. Yet somehow, This little boy carried knowledge of a life no one had ever taught him. As he grew older, the memories of Bara slowly faded. Cameron returned to his daily life in Glasgow, school, friends, football. But sometimes his mother would catch him staring westward, out toward the sea, a quiet sadness in his eyes, as if listening for the waves still breaking on a distant shore. Could it be that, buried deep within the layers of human memory, are echoes from lives long past? If death is a door that closes, then stories like Cameron's make you wonder. Maybe that door never really shuts. 3 stories, 3 lives, 3 souls, and 1 haunting thread. Each of them carried memories that didn't belong to their present life. An American boy remembers his fiery death in World War II. An Indian girl insists she once had a husband and a child. And a young Scottish boy finds his way back to the home he once lived in on the Isle of Barra. What about you? Have you ever felt like you've lived before, as someone else? Share your experiences with us in the comments below, whether it's a vivid dream, an unexplainable memory, or a strange sense of déjà vu from childhood. You might be holding a story of your own that's waiting to be told. Story 4. Jenny Cockell, the woman who reunited with her past life's children. From the time she was a little girl growing up in Northamptonshire, England, Jenny Cockell was haunted by strange dreams so vivid they didn't feel like dreams at all. In them, she was someone else, a woman named Mary, living in a small village in Ireland, in a rundown house surrounded by children. She remembered the exhaustion of poverty, the deep ache of a failing body, and the unbearable sorrow of knowing she was dying, leaving her children behind. These visions weren't fragmented fantasies. They were full, living memories, complete with the smell of turf smoke, the sound of crying infants, and the overwhelming love and fear of a mother's final moments. As Jenny grew older, she could no longer ignore them. She began recording every detail, the children's names, the layout of the house, the winding dirt road outside, even the location of a stone well beside the house. Though she had a life of her own, a husband, children, a steady job, Jenny felt a pull she couldn't explain. Something within her said she had unfinished business, not in this life, but in one long past. So she made the journey to Ireland, armed with nothing more than a hand-drawn map from memory and a heart pounding with uncertainty. Days passed, and then she found it. A small village, quiet and weathered, where every detail matched her dreams. The stone fences, the hedgerows, the muddy paths, everything was as she had seen it in her childhood visions. The house where Mary once lived had collapsed decades earlier, but the well, the same stone well Jenny had drawn years ago, still stood in the same place. After combing through public records, Jenny discovered Mary's full name, Mary Sutton, who had died in the 1930s shortly after giving birth to her 8th child. And the names of those children? They matched exactly what Jenny had written down in her journal years before. But Jenny didn't stop there. She did what no one had dared to do. She set out to find Mary's children, now elderly and scattered across Ireland and England. One of the sons, now over 60 years old, sat in stunned silence as Jenny told him things only Mary could have known. The place he hid when he cried after her death, the lullaby she sang to him before bed, and the wool blanket she wrapped him in during bitter winters. There were no dramatic outbursts, just long, quiet moments and a trembling embrace. It was as though, after all those years, their mother had come back, not in flesh, but through some mysterious thread that still connected them across lifetimes. Each child Jenny visited reacted the same way, not because she proved herself with facts or dates, but because of something deeper, a maternal warmth that could not be faked. They didn't just believe her, they felt her. Jenny documented the journey in her book Yesterday's Children, which was published internationally and later adapted into a film. But to her, this was never about fame. It was about peace. Peace for herself, for Mary, and for the children who had never fully stopped longing for their mother. Can a soul return, still carrying love, sorrow, and the need to heal what was left behind? Can memory, real memory, traverse death and time just to allow a mother to hold her children one more time? We don't know. But what Jenny Cockell experienced makes it harder to believe this life is all there is. Story 5. Ryan Hammons, the boy who remembered his Hollywood life. At just 4 years old, Ryan Hammons, a boy living in Oklahoma, began having strange, intense dreams. He would wake up at night, gasping for breath, telling his mother that he missed his old life in Hollywood. He described living in a big house with a swimming pool, having a beautiful wife, traveling the world, and working in the movie industry. At first, Ryan's mother, Cindy, assumed it was just a child's imagination. But when he began speaking of names like Rita Hayworth, describing movie sets, editing rooms, and even claiming he had died of a heart attack in a hospital, she started to wonder if something deeper was happening. One day, while flipping through a Hollywood photo book, Ryan suddenly pointed to a black and white image from the set of an old film and shouted, "Mom, that's me! That was me back then!" The man in the photograph was an unnamed background actor standing behind actress Rita Hayworth. The picture had no caption, but Cindy was determined to find out who he was. She reached out to Dr. Jim Tucker, a researcher of past life memories at the University of Virginia. After months of investigation, Dr. Tucker and his team identified the man Ryan claimed to be as Marty Martin, a bit part actor in 1930s Hollywood who later became a successful talent agent. Martin had lived in a Beverly Hills mansion with a pool, traveled to Europe, and, just as Ryan had said, died of a heart attack in a hospital in 1964. But what truly astonished the researchers were the details Ryan knew that weren't available anywhere online or in public records. He said, "I had 2 sisters before," which turned out to be true. Marty had 2 sisters, though this had never been widely documented. Ryan also claimed to have owned a pink Cadillac, a detail confirmed by one of Marty's distant relatives. Perhaps the most chilling moment came when Ryan described the moment of his death. He spoke of lying in a hospital bed, hearing doctors and nurses around him, and then everything went dark. It was the kind of account only someone who had experienced death could describe, with emotion, with clarity, with a trace of fear. Dr. Tucker later documented Ryan's case as one of the most compelling and verifiable reincarnation stories ever recorded. Not only because of the astonishing accuracy of the information Ryan provided, but also because of the unmistakable emotional weight behind his memories, as if a soul still clung to a life it hadn't fully let go of. As Ryan grew older, the memories slowly faded, like the closing scene of a long-forgotten film. But every now and then, he would look into a mirror and whisper, "I miss the lights, I miss the stage, and I miss who I used to be." Could it be that behind a child's innocent eyes lives a life already lived? Is death truly the end, or just a curtain between acts, as the soul prepares for its next role? Story 6, Barbro Karlen, the girl who remembered being Anne Frank. From the time she was just 3 years old, Barbro Karlen, a young girl from Sweden, began telling her parents about another life, a life in which she wasn't Barbro, but a Jewish girl named Anne, living in a crowded city, always on the run, always hiding in fear. Her parents thought she was simply imagining things. But Barbro didn't speak like a child playing make-believe. She didn't say it was a dream or a story. She said, "These are my memories." By the age of 7, Barbro had written her first book, a collection of poetry titled Man on Earth. The depth of emotion in her words stunned adults. Her poems spoke of death, sorrow, war, and a profound longing for a life that no longer belonged to the present. Everything changed when the family traveled to Amsterdam. Barbro had never been to the Netherlands before, yet she led them through the streets, turning confidently down narrow alleys until they stood in front of a tall building at 263 Prinsengracht. She turned to her mother and said, "I've been here before. I lived up in that attic." It was the house where Anne Frank and her family hid from the Nazis. Inside, Barbro began to tremble. She described the layout of the rooms, the narrow stairways, the desk where Anne wrote her diary, the creaking floorboards, the fear. And then she spoke of the moment they were found, the sound of boots, the terror, and being taken away. The memory was still there, lodged in her bones. She had never read the diary of Anne Frank, yet the details she shared were frighteningly accurate. Scholars and skeptics couldn't explain it, but they couldn't deny it either. The information she possessed, particularly small, intimate details not publicly known at the time, was far beyond what any child could possibly imagine. Barbro grew up with 2 parallel lives, one as a Swedish girl raised in a quiet household, and the other as a girl from the past, hunted, silenced, and remembered by millions. She never sought fame or validation, but when she did speak, she did so with purpose. History doesn't stay in the past, she said. It lives in people, in wounds that haven't healed, and sometimes it lives again through memories you never asked to carry. Could a soul truly be reborn, still carrying the scars of its past? Could a girl named Barbro really have once lived and died as Anne Frank? We may never know for sure, but if truth can sometimes be found in what we cannot explain, then Barbro Karlen's story may be one of the clearest echoes from the other side of time. And what about you? Have you ever carried a feeling, a memory, or an image that no one ever taught you? If you've ever felt like you belonged to another time or understood something you couldn't explain why, share it with us in the comments below. We would love to hear your story, because maybe those memories aren't just coincidence. Story 7. Gus Taylor, the boy who said he was his own great-grandfather. When Gus Taylor was just 18 months old, he began saying things that made his family pause. Not baby talk, not imaginary friends. He looked directly into his father's eyes and said, "I'm your grandpa." Everyone laughed at first. They thought it was just a strange comment from a child who didn't know what he was saying. But Gus repeated it again and again, and each time his eyes held a calm, quiet certainty that no toddler should possess. Gus insisted that he was Augie, the nickname of his great-grandfather who had passed away decades earlier. Gus had never met him. The family rarely spoke about him. But then came the details. Gus began recalling things that only Augie could have known. He spoke of Augie's sister by name, a woman who had died long before Gus's parents were even born, a name no longer mentioned in the household. He remembered the location of Augie's burial plot, described an old car that Augie once drove, and even recounted a story about how Augie had once fixed a broken radio with his bare hands, a story that had only been shared once at a dinner table years before Gus was born. One day, while looking at an old black-and-white family photograph, Gus pointed to a man in the background and said, "That's me, but I was bigger then." It was Augie, in his younger days. Gus had never been shown that photo before. No one had identified the man to him. But the most haunting part was Gus's recollection of how he returned. He described dying, then floating through a gateway of light. He saw a woman holding a baby, his mother, pregnant with him at the time, and then he said he slipped into the baby's body to come back. It sounded like science fiction, but the things Gus knew were too accurate, too specific, to dismiss as coincidence. Researchers of Reincarnation visited the family and found no evidence that Gus had ever been told any of these facts. As he grew older, the memories began to fade, like mist evaporating in morning sun. But for a few brief years, it was as though the soul of a man long gone had returned, simply out of love, and never quite let go. Could it be that within a family line, souls pass on like sacred fires that never extinguish? Could a young boy carry the gaze of a man who once held him as a newborn? We may not have the answers, but if life is a circle with no true beginning or end, then the story of Gus Taylor reminds us, time may pass, but the soul never disappears. Story 8. Purnima Ekanayake, the girl who remembered dying in a motorcycle accident. As a young girl living in the city of Bakamuuna, Sri Lanka, Purnima Ekanayake began telling her parents strange things about another life in another place and a sudden violent death. She claimed that she had once been a man who lived in Kelaniya, worked as a radio repairman, and had died in a motorcycle accident. At first, her parents thought she was just imagining things, but Purnima wasn't simply pretending. She spoke clearly of the man's name, Sumith Prasanna, the name of his wife, their child, details of his daily life, his hairstyle, the objects he owned, even where he had been buried. She also described the exact moment of her previous death, returning home from work on a motorcycle, then crashing into a bus. She said, "I felt my head hit something hard. Then everything went dark, and I woke up in my new mother's belly." One chilling detail stood out above all: a dark red birthmark on the left side of Purnima's chest, the exact spot where Sumith had suffered a fatal chest injury during the crash. By the age of 6, Purnima insisted once again, "This isn't my real family. My real family is in Kelaniya." Her parents, both confused and intrigued, took her there. As soon as they arrived, Purnima led the way through the town, without hesitation, until she reached a modest house beside a small canal. She pointed and said, "This is where I lived." Inside lived the family of Sumith Prasanna, who had died years earlier in a motorcycle accident. Purnima greeted each member of the household by name. She recalled their nicknames, old stories, and even pointed to an object she said she had hidden beneath the wooden floor. When they lifted the boards, the item was still there. The family didn't know whether to be terrified or comforted. But Sumith's mother broke down in tears when Purnima softly called her Amma, the Sinhalese word for mother. Researchers from the University of Sri Lanka conducted interviews with all involved and concluded there was no way this girl could have known such specific details unless she had actually lived in that house before. As she grew older, Purnima's memories gradually faded. She returned to a more ordinary life. But those who had seen her eyes light up when she recognized her previous family or heard her trembling voice recount the crash that ended her life, they never forgot. Could it be that a soul, torn from life too suddenly, returns not to relive, but to find closure? And might the mark on a child's skin be more than coincidence, but a scar left by a death long past? Science still has no explanation. But the story of Purnima Ekanayake endures as quiet testimony to a force that may transcend life, death, and everything in between. Story 9. Imad Elawar, the boy from Lebanon who remembered names of his past life's family. In the early 1960s, in a quiet village in Lebanon, a young boy named Imad Elawar began to stir confusion and awe within his family and community. At just 5 years old, Imad started telling his parents, "This isn't my real home. I used to live in Kabarchamun. I had a red truck, and I died after getting sick." But that wasn't all. Imad listed dozens of names, people he claimed were from his real family, old friends, and even a neighbor he once argued with over land boundaries. He spoke of daily routines, like sipping tea every morning beside a white-painted window. He recalled secrets, like hiding money in a clay pot under the stairs. His parents were bewildered. They had never been to Kabarchamun, a village located several kilometers away. And yet, their young son seemed to carry memories from another life, complete with vivid, deeply personal detail. News of the case reached researchers at the University of Virginia, including renowned reincarnation expert Dr. Ian Stevenson. He and his team traveled to Lebanon, carefully documenting everything Imad said before visiting Kabarchamun, ensuring no contamination or influence. When they brought Imad to the village, they gave him no guidance whatsoever. As soon as they arrived, Imad fell silent, but his eyes scanned his surroundings like someone trying to remember a dream. Then he pointed to a 2-story house and said, "That's where I used to live." As the family inside emerged, Imad called each of them by name. He described objects in the house without ever having been inside. He recognized his sister from his past life and began to cry. She, too, was overcome with emotion as Imad repeated private things she had only shared with her brother, things she had never told another soul. Dr. Stevenson's team compared Imad's earlier statements with the real family's history. 25 out of 30 specific details matched perfectly, including names, occupations, relationships, and obscure personal anecdotes. There was no evidence of fraud, no contact between the families, no logical way Imad could have known what he did, unless he had actually lived that life. Imad didn't become a celebrity. He grew up quietly, fading back into a normal life. But the memory of what he once remembered remained, a moment where strangers embraced as long-lost loved ones, recognizing something deeper than the physical. Could it be that memory isn't stored solely in the brain, but within a timeless energy that lingers? And could it be that, one day, in a crowd of strangers, we might lock eyes with someone who feels strangely familiar? Imad Elawar's story doesn't ask you to believe. It simply exists, standing quietly in the shadows of science, whispering of something we have yet to fully understand. Story 10. The Syrian boy who revealed his past life's murder and burial site. In a remote village near the Syria-Lebanon border, a 3-year-old boy with deep, haunting eyes and a strange red birthmark on his forehead began to speak words that stunned his entire community. From the moment he could talk, he repeated the same phrase to his parents: "I was killed with an axe." The boy's family, part of the Druze community, a group whose beliefs include reincarnation, wasn't immediately alarmed. But as he began naming who he was in a past life, the village where he had lived and who had murdered him, the story took a dark and serious turn. One day, accompanied by his parents and village elders, the boy led them across fields, over low hills, until he stopped at a barren patch of land. He pointed at the ground and said, "I'm buried here." Skeptical but curious, the group began to dig, and what they uncovered left them speechless. A skeleton lay beneath the soil, the skull split open by a large wound in the exact spot where the boy's birthmark appeared. Beside the body, they found a rusted axe, buried and forgotten. The story spread quickly. Local authorities were called. The remains were identified as a man who had gone missing 4 years earlier from a nearby village. No one knew what had happened to him until this child spoke. But the most chilling moment had yet to come. When they brought the boy to the victim's former village, he walked calmly through the streets, then stopped in front of a man and said, "You killed me." The man went pale. He began trembling, and then, in front of the entire village, confessed to the murder. He was arrested. His confession matched every detail the boy had described, from the motive to the location of the hidden grave. This became one of the most remarkable reincarnation cases ever recorded. A child's memory of a past life not only led to a hidden body, but also solved a murder. The boy had never met the victim's family. He had no access to any information. There was no explanation, except memory. Could a soul, violently torn from its body, carry the weight of injustice into another life? And if so, might that memory return, not just to tell a story, but to seek justice? This young Syrian boy, too young to fully grasp the meaning of death, brought closure to a crime long buried in silence. Once again, we are reminded, death isn't always the end. Sometimes it is a warning, a return, and a soul, when not at peace, will not be silent. Perhaps what makes these stories so haunting is not that they are terrifying, but that they feel so real. A boy remembers the moment he fell from the sky. A woman finds her long-lost children from a past life. A child's innocent gaze exposes a murderer, as if death had never truly closed the door. Whether you believe in reincarnation or are simply fascinated by what science still can't explain, these stories open a door, not just into the past, but into the deepest nature of the soul, a force that may transcend time, space, and even death itself. We don't yet have the final answer. But maybe the real question isn't whether reincarnation is real, but rather, what holds a soul back from letting go? Is it a promise left unfulfilled, a wound that was never healed, or is it love, still intact, even after death? Thank you for joining World Mysteries on this journey through 10 unforgettable, deeply human stories. If you've ever felt an eerie familiarity with a place you've never been, dreamed of a life that isn't yours, or simply believed that you were someone else before you were you, tell us your story in the comments below. And if you're fascinated by the mysteries of reincarnation, past lives, and the echoes of forgotten memories, leave us a comment or even just an emoji, because next time we'll return with even stranger tales. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to World Mysteries so you never miss a journey into the unknown. We may not know how many lives we've lived, but one thing is certain: this story isn't over.